Thank you everyone for joining week 6 of RevUP. I have completely revamped this meeting to be on. I've interviewed a few real estate brokers, top producers in our office and other offices, and they've helped me come up with this. I've created 10.5 tricks to get your offer accepted in a hot market. So we'll jump right in. And as always, I'd love for this to be kind of open forum. So feel free. Oh, and I'll share this. I'm going to have Rachel make it look pretty because mine is just notes. But I'll share this after the fact so everybody can have this. But as I was saying, I would love for this to be open forum. So Andrew, Christy, Sarah, you guys are all on the call. If you guys have anything that has worked for you or you have clarification questions, let's discuss it, because these are all things that I've gotten a lot of these ideas from other successful real estate agents, and we can all learn from each other. So let me pull it up. Okay, and these are not in any specific order. This is kind of, I tried to order it in like the way an offer is written, in that order, but they're not in like order of most importance. So tip number 1, have your buyer write a letter. Now, this is something that has been scrutinized recently because there's been lawsuits about sellers accepting offers that had a buyer letter that was lower than another offer that didn't have a buyer's letter. And the person who didn't have the buyer's letter said, oh, he didn't choose my offer due to discrimination of some sort. One of the 5, I think it's 5 fair housing protected classes: race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, and disability. Is that right, Sarah? I think that's it. I think those are the 5 classes of protected people. And so anyways, so the concern is that if you are a seller and you get—
Sorry, I forgot to push the space bar to talk. Yes.
Perfect. So the concern is that if you're a seller and you accept an offer that has a buyer's letter, somebody could say you accepted that offer because they were a straight white family. I'm sorry, I'm using examples. This is totally hypothetical, but you accepted the offer from a straight white family, and you didn't accept our offer because we're not white or because of our sexual orientation or something else. And that's a risk as a seller. But as far as I know, and the date is December something, 9th, 2021, as of now, there are no laws or rules against the buyer submitting an offer with a buyer letter. And so let's leave the conversation about if you're a seller, should you accept buyer letters to the side for today, and just talk about it from a buyer's point of view. From a buyer's point of view, it can't hurt. Almost always it can't hurt. And very often it can work really well. You have a seller who they raised their whole family in this home. They love this home. They put their blood, sweat, and tears in this home. They've had Christmas memories at this home. And now they get a letter from this family that absolutely loves this home. They have a picture of the family and it says, oh my gosh, we can't wait to have Christmas morning in your living room with the fireplace and all that stuff. And that works. Oftentimes I've seen it, it's worked in my favor many times where someone has accepted our offer and I know for a fact we were not the highest offer. So it works. And at worst, it doesn't hurt. So if you are working with a buyer who's willing to do it, encourage your buyer to write a letter. It doesn't have to be super sappy. It can just be, hey, my name's Isaac Schaefer. My wife is Mackenzie Schaefer. We have a daughter, Bridget Schaefer, and another one on the way. We can't wait to live in your home. You've done an amazing job with the kitchen. We love the landscaping. I can just see my kids playing in the backyard, and we just love your home. Worst case, they don't take that into account. Best case, that's a huge factor in who they sell their home to. So that is tip number 1. Sarah, anything you want to add to that?
Just a disclaimer that, use maximum caution and know what risk you're taking, and that love letters, as people like to call them, can be considered a violation of the Fair Housing Act, as Isaac already covered.
Yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong, that's from the seller's point of view. From the buyer's point of view, as long as the letter doesn't contain anything discriminatory, which I can't imagine it would, there's no, as far as I know, again, I'm just speaking based off my knowledge, there's no laws against a buyer providing a buyer letter. Do you agree with that, Sarah?
There are no laws against it, but there could be consequences for you as a broker because you have the duty of, the exact words are not coming to me, but the duties covered in the law of agency pamphlet, which you should read regularly and know, say that you need to deal with everyone fairly and ethically. And in my mind, that means that as a broker, you should know better and not do the love letter. But it's your choice because it's your business.
But if you're saying something like what Isaac's saying, like, you know, it's very blatant, like you're not disclosing like your race, your age, you're just saying like, hey, you know, I could see myself like tilling some potatoes over here and, you know, having like Christmas morning like that. Like I feel like that is okay. Like when you're not disclosing like so much, because from the seller side, like I have had a seller pick based off of like a best fit for that, for like the home, taking care of the home.
Yeah. So again, like, let's take out from the seller's point of view, we can talk about that. We have talked about that in other meetings. From a buyer point of view, yeah, Sarah's right. Don't, you know, make sure the letter is not crossing any ethical lines, but a buyer writing a letter just saying that they love the home and they would love to live in the home, I see no legal or ethical problems with doing that from a buyer's broker point of view. So we'll continue to update this if things change. Number 2, pre-approval letter. So there, I've got 4 sub points in the pre-approval letter. Number 1, have a pre-approval letter with your offer. Have it be for the address. If possible, have your lender send you a pre-approval letter for the specific address, because that's indicating that the lender has reviewed that address. They know that there isn't flood insurance, and if there is, they still qualify for the home with the flood insurance. They still qualify for the home even if it has high property taxes, right? So from a listing broker's point of view, if I get a letter that has the address, that means the lender's saying they qualify not just for a $500,000 purchase, they qualify for a $500,000 purchase for this address, all things into account. And if possible, this one is opinion, but I feel very strongly about this, have the pre-approval letter be for the max they're pre-approved for. So if they're writing an offer for $500,000 and they qualify for $700,000, in my opinion, it does not hurt you to have your pre-approval letter for $700,000. And so I'll use an example here. I just wrote an offer for a client. They're approved up to $950. The home's listed at $870. And we offered $840 because we feel like it's overpriced and they don't want to pay more than $840. But we included our pre-approval letter to be $950. It's been on the market for a little bit, so we're not competing. So naturally, the listing broker said, well, we're countering you and you can go higher because we see your pre-approval. And I said, yeah, we sent you our pre-approval letter to show you that we're very strong. We don't just barely qualify for this. But our offer is not based off of what we're approved to. If it was based off what we're approved to, then we should offer $950. But that's not why we're offering this. We're offering this because this is what my buyers want to pay for this home. So my point is, it shows that listing broker that you're a very strong buyer. You didn't just squeak by qualifying for this home. And frankly, if I'm representing the seller and I see that someone literally is only qualified to 500, I'm like, man, their credit score changes by 15 points. They probably don't qualify for 500,000. That's really scary. So that's why, in my opinion, and again, you can debate that this is maybe not always the case, but almost always the case, have the pre-approval letter be for the max they're approved to show that they are very strong buyers. It's like if there's a cash buyer and they're submitting evidence of funds showing that they have the money to buy the home. If they have $5 million in the bank, I would not say, hey, just so that you have 500,000 in the bank, show that you have $5 million in the bank. Be like, look I'm a baller. I've got this much money in the bank. I can buy this home 10 times. It shows that you're very strong. So that's my opinion on the pre-approval letter. Related to a pre-approval letter, if possible, have the lender call the listing broker. Give the lender the phone number and say, please call the listing broker and sell, help me get this offer accepted. And say, hey, listen, these buyers are awesome. I've checked their credit. They don't barely qualify. They absolutely qualify. There's no concerns. They've been at their jobs for over 3 years. We're solid. Very helpful. Subpoint number 3, if possible, have it be fully underwritten. So that's what you can talk to your lender about that. But a lot of lenders will give a pre-approval letter just after checking income, debt, and credit score. But you can take the next step, have your buyer take the next step and have them get fully underwritten, where essentially the lender is saying the buyer is fully qualified We've checked everything. We've looked at, we've got their past 2 years tax returns. We've done everything and they are fully qualified. All we need to do is fill in the blank for the address and then we're good to go. And they can often close faster. And number 4 sub point for pre-approval letters, if possible, use a local lender, or if not a local lender, a lender who answers the phone. And I'm going to say some names here. Don't try and encourage your buyers, say that it will not help your offer if you're using Rocket Mortgage, Quicken Loans, Veterans United, Navy Federal. There's a lot of these big box lenders that are a little cheaper on rate, but they give terrible service and they are notorious for not answering their phone call and for having delays in closing. And if any listing broker has been at this for enough time, they know that. So if I'm getting 2 offers and they're identical, but one is approved through Rocket Mortgage and the other is approved with whatever Fairway, and it's a lender who called me and said, yeah, my buyers are perfectly qualified and blah, 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 I'm definitely going to encourage my sellers to go with the Fairway lender. Again, if all things are equal. So number 2 is pre-approval letters, and to just reiterate, make sure there's an address and their max purchase price on the pre-approval, have the lender call, if possible, have the buyer be fully underwritten, and also make sure you're trying to encourage, that's what I should say, your buyer to work with a local lender.
Hey, Isaac, if you have that already pre-addressed pre-approval letter, that gives you the advantage of putting a 0 on the days to apply for a loan, correct?
Absolutely. Let me show everyone what you mean there. Rachel's not here, so I can share my own screen. I don't even need her permission. Okay, so can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
So right here, this is the Form 22A, the financing addendum. This portion right here is saying that, and I'm paraphrasing, you should read this document thoroughly, but it's saying that the buyer has 5 days if left blank to apply for a loan for the specific property and provide a pre-approval letter for the specific property 5 days after mutual acceptance. If you already have done that, you can put 0 days. If you include, and I do this on almost all my offers, if I have a pre-approval letter for the specific property from the lender, so we've essentially told the lender we're buying this property if we get it accepted, and he sends us, yes, you're qualified for that home, that can be 0. And again, that's, as Sarah is alluding to, that's just one little thing that you can do to make your offer that much more attractive. So absolutely. Okay, number 3 is oh, my computer froze. There we go. Is purchase price and escalation clauses. So I don't need to say this. This is obvious. The higher the purchase price, the much more likely you are to get your offer accepted, right? So the higher the purchase price, that's an easy one. You have to throw it into top 10 and a half ways of getting your offer accepted. But I'm going to use that talking point to jump into the escalation clause. I love escalation clauses. So let's eliminate examples like I was talking about earlier where you're not competing against anyone. This is in a situation where you are competing against other potential buyers, okay? And there's a lot of offers, or at least more than one, and you want to get the home, but your buyer obviously does not want to pay more for the home than your buyer has to. So the escalation clause, again, I know everyone knows this, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but there's one main point I want to make on this. The escalation clause is a great way to write an offer for, let's say the home is listed at 500, but your buyer said, I want it for 500, but I'd pay up to 520,000 to get this home. Use an escalation clause, because what it's saying is, here's our offer at 500,000, but we'll go up to 520 if we have to. And this is the point I want to get to, and we'll beat the next highest offer by X. Now, this is the reason I want to talk about this. A tip for getting your offer accepted is this first box right here is saying, this is how much you'll beat the next highest offer by. Don't put $500 here. If possible, don't put $1,000 here. Put 15 plus. I often try and encourage my clients to go 2,500, 3,000. And the reason why is because what's $2,500 to a buyer? Literally, it's $10 a month. Seriously, that's what $2,500 costs you per month. It's $10 per month to raise your price by $2,500, and it makes your offer that much more attractive. So you are competing against all these other buyer agents who are using escalation clauses, and probably a lot of them are going to be around the same thing, 500,000 up to 520. But if you're saying, hey, if you accept my offer, we'll pay $2,500 more than the next offer, that's better than the other person who's saying we'll pay $500 better than the next offer. And especially if your buyer is a little less attractive in the sense of financing and other terms, I really encourage you to boost this, this number as much as possible. Because if there's a conventional 20% offer and they're offering $510,000, and you're saying you'll beat them by $500, but you're a zero down VA buyer, I don't know about you, but if I'm representing the seller, I'm gonna say, yeah, it's $500, but take $500 less and take the conventional 20% down buyer, right? So if you want to, especially if you're working with a buyer who's VA or FHA or low down conventional, and they have a lot of other terms that aren't great, I would really encourage you to have that number right here be as high as they feel comfortable going. And again, we all know how escalation clauses work, but just to repeat, this number 520, that is the max you're going to pay, right? If there's another offer at 520, your offer doesn't go to 2,500 about 520, your offer still stays at your max 520. One last thing before we move on, just make sure you tell buyers, like, yeah, hopefully we can get it at 500, but whatever your max is on your escalation, count that already. Pretend like that's what it's going to be, and make sure you're okay with that. Like, don't put something on the escalation clause that you don't feel 100% comfortable doing. We're going to try and get it for less, but if it's 520, you're good with that, because you don't want I had this happen one time where a buyer did a high escalation clause and he's like, damn, I didn't think it would go that high. And it's like, well, we shouldn't have offered that then. You know, you should only put the max you feel comfortable going.
Can I throw out a couple of things?
Please do.
So I just recently renewed my license, and they specifically covered escalation clauses. And everyone should read the bottom paragraph. Well, now you took it away. So there's a bottom paragraph about notice of
Sorry, didn't mean to do that.
That's okay. So if you get the competing offer, first of all, they have to send the competing offer if they want you to escalate. If they don't send it, then you don't have to escalate. And you're representing your buyer, so you want to represent them to the best of your ability. And I know this is about getting your offer accepted, so maybe not applicable, but still throwing it out there. So everyone should read Part 3, Section B, about the notices, just so that you know if you have to send this, because there's a separate form for it. And then the other thing is, when you get the competing offer, you should always use the worksheet where there's the math problem to get down to the net price, because sometimes a competing offer, they'll be asking for some sort of concessions from the seller, like $5,000 towards closing. And you can deduct that, and your price might already be higher without the escalation. And now you've saved your buyer money, which is good.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I'll just quickly summarize. Very important, if you're representing the seller, to read this form very clearly and make sure you follow the steps perfectly, not decently, perfectly. And if you're representing the buyer, very important to read the document and make sure the seller is following the steps perfectly, because if they don't, you can probably get you can get the home for less if the seller's broker screws up. Is that a fair recap of what you were saying?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So if they don't do this process right, the price reverts back to your original offer, and they have to give it to you for that if they've already signed everything.
Awesome. Thank you.
But you have to send the notice.
Yep, absolutely. So make sure you understand the form, and if the listing broker messes up, call Sarah or myself, and let's discuss it, how we can represent your buyer to the fullest and hopefully get the home for the original purchase price. Okay, tip number 4 is earnest money. I have 3 subcategories for earnest money as well. as much as possible. That seems obvious. The standard tends to be 1%. I don't know where that came from, but that tends to be the industry standard. And so if possible, I do at least 1%, but it's all about how you phrase it to your buyer. If you have a buyer who's putting 5% down on a conventional loan or whatever, putting 5% on the earnest money does not hurt you. You're just prepaying your down payment, right? You're just gonna have to come in with that much less when you go to closing. You still have your contingencies. All the contingencies are still applicable. If your financing falls through, you get your earnest money back. If your inspection contingency, if you find something that makes you want to back out, you get your earnest money back. But the more you put there, just like the higher on the pre-approval letter, it just makes your offer look that much stronger. So when somebody says to me, what do I have to do for earnest money? $1 is the answer. But what should you do? As much as you feel comfortable doing, because the only risk is that you're going to back out of the contract for a reason that you don't have a contingency for, and then you lose your earnest money. So as long as you have proper contingencies in place, it doesn't matter if you put $100,000 on the earnest money. You're going to get that earnest money credited to you. And so it's like prepaying your down payment. So again, don't push your buyer to do more than they feel comfortable doing. But if your buyer's asking, put as much down on the earnest money as possible. It just makes your offer look that much stronger. Again, I'm going to say this example a bunch. If I'm representing the seller and I get two offers and they're very, very similar in every way, but one offer has 20,000 earnest money, the other has 5, I'm going to take 20,000 earnest money, right? So just explain that to your buyer. Every little bit helps. And that's the whole point of this. I'm giving you 10 ways to make your offer look more attractive. And not one of them is going to probably going to get you the home. It's going to be all of them combined makes your offer that much stronger. Second sub point is a picture of the check. It's totally unnecessary, but it makes your offer look a little cooler. Cooler is the wrong word. It makes it look just a little more professional and just kind of money where your mouth is, right? You're just saying, hey, we're putting $20,000 on earnest money. Here's a check. We're going to deliver this to escrow as soon as you get this offer accepted. It just looks good. I can't explain it. It has a psychological effect on the seller. So if possible, say, buyer, send me a picture of your earnest money check. If you do that, black out the checking and routing number on the bottom. The third subcategory for earnest money, we could spend a lot of time talking about, and you want to be very careful about what I'm about to say, but it's something to consider. And that is an early release of the earnest money to the seller. Okay, so someone's trying to join. Just let Naisha in. Okay, perfect. So you can, if you're working with a buyer and the buyer loves the home and the buyer's like, dude, I want to do everything I can to get this offer accepted, right? You can suggest that the buyer releases their earnest money to the seller at a certain checkpoint. And so what that could look like is you could say, hey, what if we say once the appraisal comes in at value, or once we get past the appraisal and we agree on the new purchase price or it comes in at value, earnest money at that point is to be released to the seller. That's super attractive to the seller. The seller's getting ready to clean the home and move and all that. And if you're telling me the appraisal is going to happen 10 days, we're going to have the appraisal back 10 days before closing, and now I'm going to get $10,000 deposited into my bank account to help me move. That's awesome. Risky? Absolutely. Definitely risky, because now if something happens and the deal falls through, your financing falls through, now it's a little harder arbitration to get your earnest money back. So it's risky, but it's incredibly attractive to a seller. Feel free to talk to me if you want to talk about this more. Like I said, we could talk about this for hours, but that is a way that you can make your offer look that much more attractive, is to say, hey, as soon as we get past the appraisal, or even more risky, as soon as we get past the inspection or something like that, earnest money is to be released to the seller. It's very attractive. And what a lot of people don't know is it's still refundable. Even if the financing falls through at the last second, you still can get your earnest money back. It's just harder because now instead of just going to escrow and getting your earnest money back,
right, get it from the seller
and earnest money back. It's a little more complicated, but it's something to think about. Okay, so that's number 4. That is high earnest money in general. Make it as high as possible. Have a picture of the check, and consider, if your buyer wants to be risky, consider having your earnest money be released to the seller before closing, whatever checkpoint they feel comfortable at. Number 5 is closing date. So when I write an offer, if I have a buyer who isn't in a situation where they absolutely need to be in by December 31st latest, I will call the listing broker and I'll say, hey, what date does your seller want for closing? You pick the date. We're good with any date. 60 days, fine. 45 days, fine. 30 days, we'll do our best, right? But ask them, what is the best closing date for your seller? So that's an easy one, but try and be as flexible on that as possible. And then double check with your lender. If they say 2 weeks, call your lender and see if that's possible. It's probably not possible, right? Number 6 is section W of the Form 21. This is a risky thing. What I'm about to tell you, everything I'm saying has certain risk. So make sure you explain this properly. But down here in the bottom right, section W of the Form 21 is the information verification period. This clause states, actually, I'm going to read this one because this is important. Buyer shall have 10 days after mutual acceptance to verify all information provided from the seller or listing brokerage firm related to the property. This contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless a buyer gives notice identifying the material inaccurate information within 10 days of mutual acceptance. If buyer gives notice under this section, then the agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. So this is somewhat of a get out of jail free card for the buyer. You can write an offer with no home inspection and the buyer can, walk the home after mutual acceptance and change their mind. And potentially, I'm not telling people to do this. I don't think what I'm about to say is ethical, but tentatively someone could do something, what I'm about to say. They could check out the home again after mutual acceptance and say, dude, how do I get out of this? I don't want this home. I know I don't have an inspection contingency. And you can go into the listing and be like, this is a real example. Say, oh, look at the listing broker said there's gas at the home. There isn't gas at the home. You don't actually care about that, but technically that was inaccurate information. And we're going to use that inaccurate information to back out of the contract. So flip it on its head. If I'm a seller and somebody crosses out section W, that is eliminating that get out jail free card for the buyer. And again, it just makes your offer that much more attractive than every other buyer who hasn't waived that. It's just one less loophole that the seller has to be worried about. So make sure you explain it very thoroughly to your buyer before you do this. But if the buyer is willing to get rid of this clause, you can cross this out and initial it. I will throw in a asterisk to that. The MLS specifically says to not manipulate the forms. And so I think the MLS says we shouldn't do that, though it's not an MLS rule. It's not a Department of Licensing rule. I'll let Sarah, you tell me if you think I'm wrong. So they say don't do it. And they kind of say, if you do it, it's not on us if something bad happens. So, again, use extreme caution when doing this, but it's a good way to make your offer just a little more attractive. Any thoughts on that, Sarah?
I think you covered everything.
Fantastic. Okay, section number 7, tip number 7 is solid financing. So that's that we could talk about that all day also. So I'll try and not take up too much time on this, but obviously the better the financing, the more likely you are to get your offer accepted. So but unfortunately with this point, at least this portion up here of the Form 22A, there's not much you can do, right? If someone's going FHA, it's generally because they can't go conventional or because conventional is so much less attractive to their credit score that they don't want to go conventional, right? So I'm not so much saying if your VA, convince them to go conventional, or if they're FHA, convince them to go conventional. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, obviously, sellers take that into account, okay? So the better the financing, the more likely you are to get your offer accepted. But there are things you can do on this form that'll make your offer even more attractive. So let's talk about section 2. I've talked about this a lot in previous meetings, so I don't want to belabor these points too much. But section 2 is talking about the waiver of the financing contingency. So section 2A says, let's check this box here, 21 days if left blank. It says at any time after 21 days, the seller can deliver a Form 22AR to the buyer. The 22AR says, buyer, it's been 21 days. At this point, you either need to waive your financing contingency or if you don't, the seller can, at that point, back out of the contract if they want to. So a lot of you know, you all should know that the seller can't back out of a contract. There's really no way. They can back out of the contract if the buyer doesn't deliver earnest money in time, or if the buyer says they want $100,000 price reduction, the seller says, no, we don't want it. And the buyer says, well, we need it. Then the seller can say, no, we're not going to do it. You can back out that way, right? But the only way a seller can back out
A late 35R too.
Late 35R, yeah, there are ways, but the only way a seller can back out of a contract is if the buyer does not honor their side of the contract, right? They fail to do something in time, or they try and change the contract using a low appraisal or the inspection contingency. If the buyer does everything they're going to do, everything they say they're going to do, the seller has no outs from the day that you have mutual acceptance, except for this. If you as a seller submit a 22AR, the buyer can either waive their financing contingency, or they can, or the seller has the option to back out. So let's put this into real terms really quick, just to clarify what that means. All that is saying is if the buyer says, yeah, I'm good waiving my financing contingency, then it's saying, cool, if your financing falls through after you've agreed to waive your financing contingency, now you don't get your earnest money back. Okay. And if this buyer doesn't feel comfortable doing that, that's fine. The seller's probably not going to back out, but they have the option to. So all I was going to say about this is if your buyer feels very confident in their financing, I used this example in a recent meeting. I had a buyer recently who'd been at his job for 30 years. He had no concern about losing his financing at all, and he was willing to take the risk. He was willing to have a very short period of time and waive his financing at that point. In fact, in his case, he actually did 0 days and waived his financing right at the get-go using Section B. Let me clarify really quick. I'm not saying to do that. In fact, I'm saying don't do that unless your buyer is incredibly confident in their financing and you've explained all the risks. But shortening these timelines can really help you in making your offer that much more attractive. One last point I'm going to make on this is if you're doing that, I would almost always check will not on this section right here, or this section if you're going to automatically waive your financing. And that's saying we're waiving our financing, but if the appraisal comes in low, we're not waiving our financing. It's barring the appraisal still. Okay, so if you check will, it's saying if you waive your financing, you're also waiving the appraisal. So if the appraisal comes in low, you have to pay the difference or you lose your earnest money. So that's really important. Last thing you can do on the 22A to make your offer a little more attractive, this is saying the seller will pay a portion of the buyer's closing costs. Obviously, if you say 0 there or as low as possible, that's way more attractive. And then lastly, if you have a buyer who is VA, if you click this box saying the buyer will pay their portion of the VA escrow fee, which is generally covered by the seller. So those are just a few tips on how you can make your financing addendum look a little more attractive. Oh, I had one more note here. Secondly, if you are putting probably 50thly, because I've had a lot of points. If you are putting a lot of money down as a down payment, have proof of funds. You can use a Form 22EF, but you don't need to. You can just have a picture of a bank statement or a picture of their bank account. Again, make sure you black out the checking and routing numbers if they are visible. But if someone is putting 20% down on a $500,000 home, that is $100,000. If I'm the listing broker, I want to make sure you have the $100,000. So if you send a picture with your offer that shows that they have over $100,000 in the bank, it makes your offer look a little bit more attractive. You don't have to do that, but a lot of listing brokers will ask you to do that to make sure that you're not full of it. Okay, let's talk about the Form 22AD. This is where we're going to probably spend the most of our time today. This is point number 7, and I thought I had 22AD up. Yeah, no, that's the D. Here I was thinking I was so prepared. I'm at the Gig Harbor office and there are squirrels everywhere outside. They're like seriously jumping everywhere. I don't know what's going on. It's a little disturbing to me. I don't like squirrels. I'm not sure if people know that about me. I was attacked by a squirrel when I was a kid. It's very scary. Okay.
They're so cute.
That is so not true. You have never, that is a clear indication that you've never been attacked by a squirrel, Christy, okay?
You didn't have peanuts in your pocket, I'm guessing.
No, okay, so I'm in bed, asleep, at home. I'm like 14 years old, and I hear something. I'm like, it's probably nothing. I go back to sleep. I wake up, and there's a squirrel on my chest, staring at me with his little demon red eyes. So scary. I start completely screaming, running, and it starts chasing me. Swear to God. It was chasing me around the house. I'm running around the house, being chased by a squirrel. I locked myself in the pantry. And then oh my God, it was so scary. And everyone's like, oh, were you like 6 years old? I'm like, no.
Oh my gosh, that would be scary. If I woke up and a squirrel was on my chest, that would be really freaky.
Really horrifying. I don't advise anyone going through that. It was not a fun experience. Anyways, yeah, a little bit of PTSD there. PTSD, post-traumatic squirrel stress disorder. Anyways, okay, Form 22AD. We've talked about this a lot in other meetings too, but this is it's one of my favorite forms to talk about because I feel like there's a ton of ignorance when it comes to this form. And by ignorance, I don't mean that to be rude. I just mean like people literally don't understand what you're doing. So let's talk about it. Form 22AD is saying if the appraisal is less than what we are pending at, so let's use $500,000, then we will pay up to a certain amount above the appraised value to cover the difference. So what does that mean? I made a spreadsheet to show you. This is where Robin and Rachel would start teasing me about making a spreadsheet, and I don't care because it's awesome. And I'm happy to share a spreadsheet with anyone. I've used this to help explain what 22AD is actually doing, because what a lot of people hear from what I just said is they hear me saying, so if it appraises lower, I have to pay more than I agreed to pay. That's what I want to push back on. I'm not saying everyone should use a 22AD. I'm saying everyone should know how to explain a 22AD so that the buyer knows what they're actually doing. Okay, section 1 is saying, purchase price is 500. The appraisal is 500,000. You're already putting 5% down, which is $25,000. The appraisal was at 500, so there's no additional down payment. So your loan amount is 475. Okay. Your closing costs are roughly 2%, which is $10,000. So your total out of pocket is $35,000. This is your principal and interest. By the way, this is how cool my spreadsheet is. There are formulas here on the bottom that automatically calculate the payment. So you don't have to go to a mortgage calculator. It already does that. So if you change something here, like if you change this to be 4%, it'll change the payment. Oh my gosh, I thought I was just about to not do it. That would have been embarrassing. No, it did it. See, so it changes it. So that's awesome. So when you get the interest rate and the loan term from the lender, you can input those specifically. Again, I'll share this with everyone so you have it. You can input exactly what your buyer's interest rate is. So this should be exact. And then this is according to my lender, roughly what PMI will be for a purchase price of this type with this down payment and so on. This is what the property taxes were for the property. This is what the insurance was. So if the home appraises at 500, you're coming in with 35,000 out of pocket and your payment's 2756. Cool? All right, good. Let's say the home appraises at 490. The purchase price is still 500. You're not paying more. This is where it gets really important to explain it properly. And now, seriously, when I'm explaining 22AD, I always use this spreadsheet. The purchase price is still 500,000. The lender is now saying it appraised at 490. So we're only loaning 95% of 490 instead of 95% of 500. Okay. So now your down payment is 5% of 490 plus an extra $10,000. Your closing costs are still $10,000. So now your down payment, instead of being $35,000, is $44,500. But here's the important part, and this is why the spreadsheet is so helpful. You're just paying a little more out of pocket and financing less, which means your monthly payment goes down by about $40 a month. So that's why this is so important to explain this to people properly, because they hear what I said at first and they say, well, I don't want to pay more for this home than 500,000. You're still paying 500,000 for the home. The bank is just financing less. And then you can say, we put 20,000 on 22AD. So worst case, it could appraise at 480, in which case your down payment would be $24,000. You'd pay an additional $20,000 out of pocket plus $10,000. So your total out of pocket would be $54,000. And now your payment is $2,667 as opposed to $2,756. So your payment goes down by almost $100 a month if this happens. So it's not all bad. That's why I want to explain to the buyer. I want to explain, if you pay above the appraisal, it's not like you're getting that with no benefit. The benefit is you have a lower payment, right? You have to pay off less. You have less interest to pay. So I just like to explain that. It's still a very interesting form, because by definition, what you're saying is, if we're assuming that an appraiser is going to tell you the market value of a home, we are essentially saying that we will pay more potentially than the home is worth, according to the appraisal. I think it's important to point out, number one, that's according to an appraiser who is not infallible, right? Christy and I can go on a listing appointment and I could say a home's worth 500 and Christy could say it's worth 510. Who's right, who's wrong? We don't really know, right? My point is, it's somewhat subjective. As much as appraisers might say otherwise, these things are not exactly clear as mud. It's a little subjective, right? So you're just saying that you'll increase your down payment to cover the difference between your purchase price and what it appraises at. And then important, if you do have a $20,000, nope, I did that wrong. Sorry, give me 1 second. If you say you're going to pay $20,000, sorry, I'm getting lost. Okay, so you say you're going to pay $20,000 above appraisal. So we can use option one, option two. There's obviously options in between. You could say, and there's also another circumstance that could work out really well for you, where it appraises at 470, in which case your down payment stays, your additional down payment is still max 20,000 above what the appraisal was. So my point in saying this is, now this goes down to 490. Does that make sense? So there's another circumstance. It's kind of like explain the escalation clause, right? My earlier example, if you're offering an escalation clause up to 520, it may not go up to 520. Same with 22AD, it may not go up to 20,000, but it could also go down to 30,000 below appraisal, in which case the seller generally will drop the price. They don't have to, but they will generally drop the price because you've already met them in the middle and said you're going to pay 20,000 above the appraisal. But if it comes in 30, the seller's generally going to meet you in the middle a little bit there. So anyways, you can use this this spreadsheet, and I'll share this with everybody, to kind of explain these different scenarios that could occur, and explain that that just because you're paying above appraisal doesn't mean it's coming at no benefit to you. There is a benefit to coming with more out of pocket. I don't know about you. I've had a buyer before say they're putting 5% down, and then we're a week before closing, they're like, hey, I just got some money from a relative and I'd actually like to put 10% down. Is that okay? And just because they want a lower payment. So you're essentially just doing that, right? Last thing I'm going to say about the 22AD, again, make sure you're explaining it properly and explaining the risk. But, oh my gosh, I totally just blanked on what I was saying. I was going to say.
While you think about it, can I say that third situation that Isaac was talking about, that is when you want to use the 22ADN to give notice. It's when the additional down payment does not reach all the way up to the low appraisal price, or the purchase price.
Super important, guys. If you do not use the proper forms when something happens, there can be major repercussions for your buyer and subsequently you. If you do not properly disclose to the seller that the appraisal came in less than the purchase price and less than the difference between your 22AD, you have to use the 22AD in. And if you don't, I don't have the form in front of me, but I believe it says you might be responsible as a buyer for covering the whole difference, and they'll sue you. Sorry to be dramatic, but that's what's going to happen, right? So make sure if something happens, if you get a low appraisal and you want to be sure about how to go about it, please call me, talk to me. Let's make sure we do it the right way. And there are timelines too. You can't be like, oh, I'll get to that later. To a certain extent, you can. You don't have to wait. You don't have to do it in 24 hours, but I think it's 3 days to notify the seller. And you have to notify them the right way. It's not a text saying, hey, by the way, the appraisal came in low. No, you have to send the proper documentation. If you don't, the buyer might be responsible or their financing might be waived. So very, very, very important. Thank you for saying that, Sarah.
Yeah, and proper documentation includes sending the actual appraisal when you send either the 22AN or the 22ADN.
Absolutely. I remembered what I was going to say. I was just going to say, just like with the escalation clause, don't put any number on the 22AD that your buyer isn't 100% ready and expecting to pay. Does that make sense? So if they're putting $20,000 on the 22AD, let's assume the worst. I'm showing them this situation number 2. I'm saying, let's plan on this, right? Let's plan on this option. It could be option 1 or somewhere in between, but just making sure you're okay with coming in with $54,000 out of pocket. That's everything. That's your closing costs and everything, but you're good with that, right? You want to make sure that they know, don't put a penny more on 22AD than you're prepared to pay, because you can't change your mind. Once you put it in writing and the sellers accepted it, you have committed to doing that. And if you don't do it, you can lose your earnest money. You will lose your earnest money. So that's really, that was a point that I wanted to make, is don't write checks you can't cash. I don't know. That's probably a saying. I think it's a saying. I'm gonna go with it. Okay, we're almost done here. That was number, where'd it go? That was number 8. Okay, number 9, Form 17 waiver. This is a really simple one that we can talk about really quick. So most people, when they are representing the buyer, they have the buyer sign. On the last page, the buyer signs section 1. 1 says the buyer has reviewed the Form 17 and they have, or the buyer hasn't reviewed the Form 17. We're just acknowledging that we've received it and we have 3 days to review it. And if for any reason we decide we don't like something that we found in the Form 17, we can back out. That's really unattractive to the seller, like the section W of the Form 21. If you have that, that's just a get out of jail free card for the buyer. So if I'm representing a seller and I have lots of offers and a buyer is asking me, how can I make my offer more attractive? I'm going to say, sign section 2 of the Form 17. And it's, by the way, totally safe to do this. All you're saying here is buyer has read and reviewed the seller's responses to the seller disclosure statement, and buyer approves the statement and waives the right to revoke their offer based off of this. So all I'm saying, if you're my buyer and I'm trying to say, hey, let's sign section 2, I'm just saying, hey, all we're saying is we've reviewed it. So review it, make sure you're good with it. And let's ask questions if we have them, and then say, we're good. We've seen it, we're good. So it's just eliminating that get out of jail free card. And I almost always have my buyers sign this. Even if we have an inspection contingency, I do that because I just want them to know, hey, we're good. We reviewed it. We're good. We've seen it. So we don't need this section 1. Again, don't have them sign section 2 if they haven't reviewed it and you haven't explained the risk of doing so. But if they've reviewed it, sign the section 2. It makes your offer look that much more attractive. Number 10, pre-inspections. I love this option because there's not a ton of risk to a buyer. The risk is the cost of an inspection. So what a pre-inspection is saying is you have to get a Form 35P signed by the seller before you do it. Let's say a seller lists on a Thursday and you show the home on Thursday or Friday and your buyer's like, oh my gosh, we love this home. What do we have to do to get it? And we've talked about all these 10 tips about how to make your offer more attractive. And they're like, okay, what else can I do? Can we waive our inspection? Well, they can waive their inspection, but I purposely didn't use that as a tip because I think that's really risky and I'm not even going to talk about that today. But one thing you can do that's very safe is we can do an inspection before we write our offer. So let's do an inspection on Saturday or Sunday, review the inspection report, and then submit our offer saying, hey, we've done an inspection, we know what we're getting into, and we are now waiving our inspection contingency because we've already done it. The risk in doing this is twofold. Number 1, the buyer could do an inspection and find out they're not happy with the property, not write an offer, but then you're right back where you started if you wrote the offer and did an inspection, backed out, right? Same thing. Or this is the riskier part. You could do an inspection, write an awesome offer, and still get beat out by another offer. And now you're out the $500 you spent on the inspection. So make that very clear to the buyer, but that's not really risky. I mean, we all would risk $500 here and there all the time. That's a pretty small risk to make your offer so much more attractive. Because from a seller's point of view, when I have an offer with an inspection contingency, I'm always telling my seller, listen, I know your home is nice and everything, but it's like almost every time just because they have an inspection contingency, the buyer is going to ask for something. And sometimes it's not small. Sometimes they're going to ask $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 or more off the purchase price, or to be paid to their closing costs because of BS. Sometimes it's not BS, but sometimes it is. So if you do that ahead of time, they know they have a bird in the hand who's not going to retract their offer or change the terms of the offer. We know this is a solid offer and they have no contingency to back out or change the terms based off of the inspection. So it's very, very attractive to the seller. And yeah, if anyone has questions about that, let me know. Oh, one last thing. When you do a pre-inspection, you can still ask for things. So if I am representing a seller and my seller has two offers, one is for $500,000 with an inspection contingency, and the other is a very similar offer, similar financing, but it's for $500,000 with $5,000 of seller paid closing costs. But they've done a pre-inspection. They said, hey, just so you know, we're offering $500,000 less $5,000 in closing costs because we found problems that any other buyer is going to call out too, and we want this money to be able to fix these problems. I'm going to be inclined to encourage my seller to take the $5,000 less offer because, again, it's a bird in the hand. We know we're getting $495 essentially. Does that make sense? That's debatable. Some people might be like, I'm going to roll the dice and go with the other buyer because I don't think they're going to ask for $5,000. That's possible. You could also say, hey, we've done a pre-inspection and we're good with everything, but this offer is contingent on you getting the sewer line fixed at 20 feet. There's a gap. You know, you can ask for things to be repaired or fixed or replaced too. So it's essentially getting the inspection contingency out of the way before you get the offer accepted. And again, Sarah, speak up if you think I'm incorrect here. The only risk to your buyer in doing this is they waste the money on the inspection. There's no other risk in doing this. So it's like, do you want to risk $500 to get the home that you absolutely love? And we're going to write such a great offer. And this is like one thing we can do to make it that much more attractive. Seems like a no-brainer to me. Any thoughts on that, Sarah?
No, I agree with what you're saying. And I think it's a lot safer than just straight up waiving. There's a section on the 35W where you can check that you've had a pre-inspection and put any agreed upon repairs or terms. There's some lines you can write on. So you'll want to use that if you do a pre-inspection and there are things you're asking for. I wanted to ask you, Isaac, something I see a lot is people adding in, writing in that the inspection will be pass fail. I see that a lot on the 22D. Is that legit? Can you do that? And if the seller is the one asking for that as, say, part of a counter, should we agree to that or should we do a full inspection? What do you think?
Yeah, so what Sarah's talking about is a lot of people will say, hey, we have a form 35 saying that we have 3 days to do an inspection and all that. But we are putting in writing in our offer. It says inspection is for informational purposes. Buyer will not ask for any repairs or remedies. That's verbal. Even though it's in writing, it's verbal. There's the inspection, the terminology in the inspection contingency supersedes anything you handwrite on a form 34 that says, hey, we're not going to ask for any repairs. So if you have spoken with your buyer and your buyer's like, dude, I just want to see an inspection, but I'm good. We're not going to back out. We're not going to ask for anything. Then yes, I would include it from a buyer's point of view. And you know, when you send the offer, call the listing broker and just say, listen, we just want to inspect the home, just make sure that it's not falling over, but like, we're good. We're not going to ask for any repairs. I'm good with that from the buyer's agent point of view. If the buyer's okay with it, if you represent the seller, just know it's kind of bullshit. It doesn't really mean anything. And I've seen, and it's happened to me multiple times. Somebody says, hey, inspections for informational purposes only. And then I get a freaking 35R asking for a $10,000 reduction. And I said, informational purposes only, huh? And they're like, yeah, well, we didn't realize all this. And it's like, so it doesn't really mean anything. It's more just like a verbal handshake. Hey, bro, we're not going to ask for anything, but they still can. Does that make sense? So yes, I like that strategy, Sarah, but as a buyer's agent, if your buyer's cool with it, but it's kind of your reputation on the line. So if you do include that, make sure you have a heart to heart with your buyer and say, hey, Yeah, we can still, if we do find out the house has fallen over, we can still back out, or we can say, hey, we're backing out, or you can give us $10,000 reduction. But like, we're not going to do that if we find a bunch of little things, right? Because it's my reputation on the line, and I'm essentially giving my word to the listing broker that we're not going to ask for repairs unless they're massive. And so are you good with that? Because it affects your reputation. If you're writing all your offers saying that, and then you're oftentimes going back on your word there, it doesn't look good, and you're going to get a bad reputation for doing that. Okay, so we've gone through 10 tips, and the bonus tip, the 10.5, is clauses on 22D. So I'm going to skim through this really quick. I always include 22D in all my offers because of section 1. Section 1 is saying listing broker and buyer broker make no representations concerning the lot size. So we're going off public record. We're not liable if it turns out the lot size is not accurate. So that's very important. That's why you always want to include 22D. But the other clauses are things that most people include that you don't have to include. And in my opinion, there's very little repercussions for the buyer. So let's talk about them really quick. Title insurance is automatically included in the state of Washington when you are using a title company. So standard owner coverage is already included. So leave that blank. The only time you really want to use this is if you need extended coverage because it's a really complicated property, commercial lot, major development lot, something like that. We could talk about that some other time if people are interested. Maybe I can get a title rep to come explain the difference in title coverages. Number 3, I love not checking this box. I've talked about this before, so I won't take too much time, but it says seller, if you check that box, seller has to have the home cleaned. Okay, 2 things. First off, you can check that box and then you can do the final walkthrough and the seller didn't have it cleaned. And what are you gonna do? I guess you can call the listing broker and say, hey, the seller didn't clean the property, and the seller will sometimes say, okay, fine.
Your little hand is pointing to the wrong box.
Yep, thank you. This one, section 3. You can call the listing broker and say, hey, it's the day before closing, and the seller didn't have the property cleaned. And I've had this happen where the seller's like, okay, like, what does clean mean? They did have it clean. What do you mean? It says remove all trash, debris, and rubbish, which is my 7th favorite word. But what does that even mean? You know what I mean? So anyways, it's a point of contention and the seller may not do it. The other thing is, if you don't check the box, most sellers, in my experience, do still have the home clean. So again, don't uncheck it without talking to your buyer. But I always tell my buyer, who cares? Like, clean the home when you buy it. Or if it's a major deal, I'll have the home clean for you. But even if you check the box, the seller generally doesn't even do that good of a job of cleaning it. So let's make our offer look a little more attractive by not checking that box. Section 4 is similar. It's just saying everything on the property is to be removed. And if it's not, then it belongs to the buyer. I like to check that box. But again, if you don't check it, it might make your offer look a little more attractive. I checked section 5. It's just identifying what utilities are at the property. Section 6, whoops, I scrolled too soon. Section 6 is only related to new construction. It's the seller disclosing what kind of installations in the property. Section 7 is for the seller to disclose any items that are leased. So again, that's not really applicable to you as a buyer's agent. That's just where you put in anything if you know that something's leased. Okay, section 8 is important though. If the seller has uploaded into supplements all the documentation related to the HOA, just like the Form 17, send it to your buyer ahead of time, tell them to review everything, make sure you're good with the fact that the HOA doesn't have any RVs, that's not allowed, and the fence, your fences can only be 5 feet high and you can only pick these 7 colors for your house. Make sure they're cool with it, and if they are, don't check this box because they don't need time to review the HOA, they already have. Again, don't do it unless you have reviewed it and you're good, but if they're good with it, don't check the box because it's one less get out of jail free card and you look that much better. I love this tip. If there is a homeowner association, there's almost always, I think always, a homeowner association transfer fee. I've seen it as low as $50, and I think the highest I've ever seen is $450. And I've sold a lot of homes with HOAs. So why not make your offer more attractive than everybody else? Because I only ever see people check this box. Seller is going to pay the transfer fee. It's $400. You're buying a $500,000 home. Why not make your offer just a little more attractive than everybody else and check that box? Just a little tip. It's not a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money. So might as well check that box. Again, these are all super minor things. That's why I have this as my bonus tip. It's not really, none of these are probably going to win you the offer, but if we're getting down to splitting hairs, it helps. Excluded items not really applicable if the seller disclosed in the listing that they have some items that they want to take that are fixtures, include them there. Home warranty also not really something you can do to help your offer be that much more attractive. But that's where you check if you're buying a home warranty for the buyer. I guess I will say, if you are buying a home warranty for the buyer, put it here and say that the buyer's broker is purchasing a home warranty for the buyer. Because if I'm representing the seller, I'm like, that's cool. I feel way better about that because I know this buyer's, if there are any problems in next year, probably less of a chance of a lawsuit because they have a home warranty covering it. So it's a tiny little thing that helps your offer. So anyways, that is my bonus tip. And that is all 10. Let's just recap really quick. So number 1, have a buyer's letter if possible. Number 2, pre-approval letter. Have a pre-approval letter with the max purchase price and with the address of the property, and have the lender call the listing broker and have them be fully underwritten and try and use the local lender. Number 3 is purchase price and escalation, as high of a purchase price as the buyer feels comfortable, and use the escalation clause if possible. Number 4, earnest money, have it be as high as the buyer feels comfortable, have a picture of the check, and consider, very risky, but consider releasing the earnest money before closing. Number 5 is be flexible on the closing date and ask the listing broker when the seller wants to close. Number 6 is section W of the Form 21. Number 7 is solid financing and consider shortening the timelines on the financing addendum. Number 8 is the 22AD, above appraised value. Number 17 is waiving the Form 17. Number 10, this is a pre-inspection. And the bonus tip is all the contingencies on the 22D. So I'll include the 22AD spreadsheet and this whole list of attractive ways to sweeten up your offer. But I hope that was helpful. And if anybody wants to talk about this in more depth, if you're confused by any of this, feel free to call me. I'd love to discuss this. And I guess since I have everyone here, does anybody else have any bonus tips that they've been able to use to help make their offers a little more attractive?
Just really, really good communication. I think sometimes I'm a little annoying, but like these last 2 ones, they've been like, we so appreciate your communication. So I feel like that really helps.
Oh, I love that tip. Yeah, I've heard a few people say how much they appreciate when you send your offer. Chrissy, you do this perfectly. Devin does this. You send your offer and you recap it in the email. You don't just say, here's my offer piece. You say, hey, our offer, here's my lender's number. Here's a pre-approval letter. We're awesome. And you know, it's almost like a buyer's broker letter to the seller saying we're awesome. So I love that tip. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We'll send all this information out in the recap email.